coming and doing to us.
Thank you, Gopal, for the invitation, your kind words introducing me, and also appreciate everyone joining. I know for people in the West Coast, we were saying this is lunchtime. For me, this would normally be dinner time, 9 p.m., as we have late dinner here in Spain. But I already ate something earlier, so I don't and I don't run out of energy, hopefully. So let me share my screen quickly and just set up so I can see some of your faces. Otherwise, it feels a bit awkward just talking to myself, to my screen. So this presentation is based on the work we did with the Team Topologies book that Gopal mentioned, and is focused on product teams and why they need a family as well. I don't know about you, but I have two small kids, two small boys. And sometimes as I see the kind of evolution of teams and sometimes the conflict as well between teams, I do tend to see some similarities with how my boys are growing up and learning and, you know, changing their behaviors. So I'm Manuel Pais. Gopal already did a good job introducing me. I've had a number of different roles throughout my career. My background is in computer science. So I've been in the industry for about 20 years, but especially the last 6-7 years, I was working as consultant, especially around DevOps and continuous delivery. And with my colleague and co-author, Master Skelton, and we often come across problems that were not related to the tools, were not even directly about the practices, and it was much more around how teams were set up and sometimes how they were incentivized and how they were behaving. So that turned into the book, Team Topologies, that was published in September last year by IT Revolution Press. So if you're familiar with some of their other books like Accelerate or the DevOps Handbook, the Phoenix Project, they're all from the same publisher. The kind of origins even of Team Topologies, before the book existed, there was already and still exists the DevOps Topologies website, which is when we started talking about what different team structures there are as we were consulting around DevOps. And we started seeing how different clients had different structures, and some felt like a good pattern and some felt like more of an anti-pattern, as they were not actually helping them get better at delivering, get better at running their services. So that's actually an interesting starting point if you're not familiar with it, but it's much more of a kind of a static view where we might be looking at these topologies and trying to figure out, does our organization look more or less like this? Does it make sense given our context and what you'll find on the website? And then this evolved into the book, Team Topologies, which is much more, our thinking evolved, and it's much more about patterns and tools that we can use that are broader than just DevOps or any specific trend or technology. And it's more about what are kind of the overarching types of teams that we might have and how do we expect them to behave and why, and the interactions between them. But so today we're going to talk about product teams, but what we really want is not necessarily product teams, right? But we want our great products. So John Cutler, who is someone I really admire around, he talks a lot about product development, but also takes into consideration the team aspects and the dynamics between teams. So if you're not following them, I recommend having a look at his work. He's very active on Twitter. And he's talking about great products. Actually, we can only reach those with this empowered, fully cross-functional teams. So often we call that product teams. And I think he's absolutely right. So we need to have these teams that are able to continuously improve and take feedback to actually get to those great products. Another kind of trend that we've seen in the last years is this idea of moving from project-oriented organizations to product-oriented organizations. It's in fact not a super new idea, but we start seeing more organizations adopting this. There's a book called From Project to Product, also by Revolution Press, which is all focused on this. But it's especially interesting because you see companies like Barclays, like BMW, Desktop, sorry, not Desktop works in this area, but some kind of big companies in the US as well, that you start seeing adopting this idea of we need to be more product oriented. So, and that means the product teams are going to fit better in that model. But it actually means, implies there's quite a lot of things that might need to change. So we need to think about financing and budgeting in a different way, perhaps more focused on teams, more focused on funding experimentation, funding products rather than funding projects. Even things like how do we set up our office layout? Obviously now we're more focused on the virtual aspect, but there's still this idea of how do we set it up, those working spaces, virtual or physical, so that we promote this product orientation and we promote that the right teams are able to communicate easily. So talking about DevOps, kind of original problem, right, that DevOps was trying to solve, the anti-pattern that was trying to solve was this kind of, especially in larger organizations where you have the development group and development teams and the operation teams, and they were incentivized according to different things, and they were not always or not frequently collaborating and working together. And so that's really the origin of DevOps, trying to bring these two groups together to actually know each other and work together on common issues around things like deployments, how do we monitor, how do we improve performance of our services, etc. And this actually helped improve the quality of the work and the morale of the teams, and avoiding a lot of that kind of back and forth where development will say, well, this is ready, but then operations say, no, it's not ready to go into production, all this back and forth. And over time, especially in the last 5-6 years, there has been research and surveys, especially the State of DevOps report that comes out every year that I would imagine that many of you are familiar with. Is nothing really new. And then the book Accelerate as well, which kind of condenses the knowledge from those reports and provides kind of the scientific, if you like, background. So that book by Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jess Humble, who also wrote Continuous Delivery book, and Jim Kim. It's quite a short book, but I think it has helped a lot our industry to focus and to think about what are we trying to achieve. So it talks about key metrics for software delivery, and operations also talks about which practices are strongly correlated to high-performing teams versus lower-performing teams. And one of the things that the book actually tells us is that, in fact, if we want high-performing teams that can deliver quickly and can respond quickly to problems, what we need is almost a single team that has development and operation skills, right? So there are different names that people use for this type of team: build and run team, cross-functional team, product team. So whatever you use, but the idea is that this team has the skills to be able to build, deliver their service, but also run it and monitor and evolve it. So this is, let's say, our ideal of how we've found that high-performing teams should look like. But if you think about how do we scale this, it's actually quite difficult. I've seen some startups and fairly kind of big startups at some point that were able to maintain this model where they try that each of these teams is as independent as possible. We actually have some examples on teamtopologies.com or our website that organizations have tried to do this, but it basically you reach a limit where this doesn't scale anymore, because the amount of skills you need in each of these teams is very hard to define. It's hard to recruit, and essentially there's a limit at some point to the scalability of just saying, well, we just have product teams and that's it. And so what can we do instead, right? And that's essentially the topic of this talk. There are more obstacles besides this dev and ops silos and other types of silos. There are multiple obstacles, at least that we've seen, especially in our consulting work, where we see some organizations are going through big reorganizations every few years because they want to be agile, and then later they want to be DevOps, which is fine. It's going to bring some value, but often also has some negative effects. And this idea that we can just go from the current state to a next state that is much better is typically is a bit naive. And so how can we actually adopt a much more continuous evolution of the organization? And many other things. So one of the things we're going to focus today is teams. This kind of cross-functional teams are being pulled in many directions. They're being asked to do a lot of things. So how can they cope with that? So these are some of the aspects we're going to focus a little bit today. So we see also many organizations where the flow is blocked. So the flow of delivery of value to our customers. And that's strongly related to how many handovers we have, right? So this is just meant as an example. Don't look at this as, it's not like the infrastructure team is the culprit. This is trying to represent that when you have a team that has ownership of a functional area like infrastructure, what happens then, development teams, they might be doing their work on a feature, their coding and testing, and then if they need some kind of resource changes, whether that's just opening a port or requesting virtual machines or database, whatever it might be, if they have to go through the infrastructure team to do that for them, then this is a handover, right? The development team is going to have to stop and wait. And this starts introducing not only delays in the flow, so we're going to be going slower, but also there's scheduling conflicts, right? The infrastructure team might have a lot of other tickets to address, a lot of other requests. So they're going to do their best to schedule your team, your development team request. But, in sometimes we see that development team might be able to develop and test a feature in 2 weeks or less, and then perhaps they have to wait 2 weeks for a port to be opened or for a VM to be provided to them. And so this is a strong contributor to slowing down the delivery and the flow of work. And in the worst cases, this gets to kind of a bit of blame culture sometimes, where you have finger pointing when there's pressure to deliver features and functionality, and then teams are trying to they are pointing out to others that we have to wait for this other team or what have you, and then sometimes that escalates as well. So it's quite bad for morale as well, even if we're not even talking about the flow and the throughput, but even just for the morale of teams typically tends to be bad. And I like to give this other example. Imagine you might think of this infrastructure team before as kind of more traditional, on-prem or your own data centers, that kind of approach. But even if you go to cloud and you say, well, obviously it has a lot of benefits, but it depends a lot on how this new cloud team is going to work. If they're still behaving as gatekeepers, even though things are easier to do, but there's still this kind of handover and requests to this team to do the work, then they're still going to slow down the flow, right? So just having a cloud team doesn't necessarily tell us a lot about how this is actually helping us go much faster or not. It depends how they behave. Another example if you think about typical component teams, so in theory, the idea that if we have a shared component, it makes sense to have a team that owns it. So they increase their knowledge around this component. They're able to change it more quickly. In theory, that makes sense. But again, if many teams, many development teams or product teams depend on this component and they have requests and they all start having to wait because the component team is the bottleneck, then we're still slowing down flow. So in practice, this idea, I haven't seen it being very successful. In some cases, yes, but it depends a lot on kind of frequency of change of this component and how many teams depend on it. Another quick example where we have sometimes organizations focus on feature teams. This might be good in some situations and bad in other situations. So one thing to be careful is if these feature teams are kind of, if you're saying, well, you can change any of the code you need, any of the applications to deploy this feature, that's great. That's going to help us go faster, deliver faster. But then once it's in production, once it needs to be supported, is how quickly are we able to respond to problems, respond to any issues related to those features if we don't have a clear ownership of the different parts of products and systems. So the flow of delivery might be faster, but then when we come to the feedback loop, if you like, if we don't have clear ownership, then it might start to slow us down in terms of our ability to respond to incidents and also requests for change in the future. So kind of the bottom line here is handovers can, if not kill your flow, at least slow it down considerably. So instead we want to kill the handovers. We want to reduce, minimize handovers effectively. And so many organizations are understanding this, and they look at their overall flow and they look at their value streams and they see handoffs are causing a lot of the wait times and the slow delivery. I include this slide because this is from the BMW talk where they explicitly are saying, they want those kind of product teams with end-to-end responsibility to reduce handovers. So they've identified that as that's actually what's slowing us down. And so you can look at the product team a little bit like this. So imagine that you have the flow of delivery and the life cycle of the product from left to right. So you want the product team to own the whole life cycle, right, of a product. Sometimes it's part of a product, part of a system, but also that they're responsible for the runtime. So they're able to take feedback from the running systems or services and also from customers and integrate that as quickly as possible in the next versions of the product. And this is effectively what allows teams to get to those great products that John Cutler was talking about, which is effectively what the organizations want. So products that your customers or potential customers engage with, that they're delighted to use them, that they want to probably pay more for them and keep using them. So we need those kind of product teams. But there's kind of elephant in the room, if you like, which is what Peter Niemark's talking about here, that to be cross-functional, one of the problems these teams face is lacking some of the necessary competences. So if we dig a bit into this, if you think about what at least when I started in 2000s, what you would expect a typical development team to know is about coding. You expect them to know a little bit about architecture, hopefully testing. At that time, 20 years ago, it was not much automated in my experience, and deploying. How do we get the changes to production? But as we look the difference to these product teams and as the technology and the landscape evolved, we start asking these teams to also, you need to understand infrastructure. With infrastructure as code, you can be responsible to create the resources you need. You need to think about CI/CD. How does your deployment pipeline look like? What are the criteria for releasing your changes, etc. The operational part. So if you want to run your services, as we were talking about as a product team, what are the operational concerns we need to have around performance, around reliability, etc., response time, etc. So you need to understand this too. We're talking about shifting security left and having teams, they're not expected to be experts in security, but to have enough understanding of, basic, at least application security, things like scanning for vulnerabilities, code analysis for insecure code, risky code, etc. OWASP top 10. So we expect teams to at least have a baseline understanding of what they need to do around security. And so there are all these different aspects we're talking about for a single team. And this is still just building the product right. This is still assuming that we have clearly identified and we have the right assumptions effectively about what we need to build and what our customers need, right? So if we also want teams to be able to experiment and to learn and to be focused on outcomes, then we also need all these other things. Understanding usability, product viability, product development, and all these other things, monitoring usage of the product. These are all needed to actually build the right product in the right way. So effectively, this means there's a lot the teams have to deal with if we're really serious about product teams, right? So how do we deal with this? On one hand, we want to increase the autonomy, let the teams be able to do more by themselves. But on the other hand, if they're lacking the competences, which are kind of the building blocks, if you like, what are they going to do? If we ask them to do things they don't know how to do, then they're going to take shortcuts, right? We're going to do the minimum we can because we are under a lot of pressure. We're going to take shortcuts, and if someone has done something similar, then we'll just go with that person tells us how they've worked. If someone has used, let's say, Puppet, for example, for infrastructure and configuration management, then perhaps we'll just use that because we don't have time as a product team to work on features and acquire the competences that we need in a much more structured way. So that's what tends to happen. And so what we need to think about is then how do we alleviate this tension between increasing team autonomy to increase flow, but if they don't have the competences, then that's actually going to decrease flow. And so we need to give space for the teams to grow, and we need to provide them a support system. So a kind of family of other teams that are going to accelerate these product teams, are going to provide them the skills and capabilities that they might be missing. Obviously, then it depends on each organization, what are those specific capabilities that the teams are missing. What we want to do is actually move away from in-flow dependencies based on those handovers that I was talking about earlier. Avoid depending on some experts to do parts of the work, so increasing the team autonomy. And that means moving away from those dependencies inside the flow of work. But it's okay to have dependencies out of the flow of work. So this is more based on capability gaps. It means if we identify the gaps that's several or most of our product teams have, then we can address those with other supporting topologies, supporting teams that are going to help them address those gaps, but not by doing their work, but actually helping them either learn or use some helpful services. And so that's where the other topologies come in. So I talk about stream-aligned team, which you can think of as a product team, effectively. So we call them streams because sometimes you have large products where you have multiple teams working the same product. Sometimes you might have, for example, regulatory streams of work as well. And so it's a bit broader, but effectively the expectations are the same and the way we expect them to work are the same. And then I'll go through the other three topologies and explain briefly, obviously what their purpose is. So as I was saying, product team, a stream-aligned team is a product team. So kind of same idea, just a different term. And so product teams and stream teams, they're going to have to grow, right? So one thing is that, sometimes it's going to get messy. So this is also related to having a culture where we allow teams to make mistakes as long as they learn from them, right? So it's not just, we can't expect this type of cross-functional product teams that need all these different skills to have that ownership. We can't expect them to be perfect and learn everything from one day to another. There has to be kind of acceptance that problems are going to happen, and what we need is to learn from them. So effectively, when I was talking about all these different capabilities, competences that you would expect these product teams to have, the problem is related to this idea of cognitive load. So cognitive load was defined by psychologist John Sweller at the individual level as the total amount of mental effort used in our working memory. So our working memory is limited, right? So there is a cognitive limit to how much we can keep at the same time. And what's interesting is there are different types of cognitive load. So there's intrinsic cognitive load. So if I'm, for example, if I'm in a software delivery team and we work with Java, then some of the intrinsic things that I need to know about is how do I program in Java? How do I create a class? How do I create a method, etc. So if I don't have that knowledge for whatever reason, whether I'm junior or I've been away for 6 months, going around the world, whatever it might be, that's going to take some space in my memory to think about how do I do these things, the kind of day-to-day tasks that are part of my role. So you can kind of, in general terms, associate this to the skills that I need to do my work. There's extraneous cognitive load, which is everything that I need to do to deliver my work, but it's not directly related to the problems I'm trying to solve or the solution I'm trying to deliver. So things like, how do I deploy the application? How do I run the acceptance tests? How do I access some test environment or some database? Or how do I monitor? So all these things that take up space in our working memory, if we need to kind of think through it and think about over and over again, how do I do this? And finally, the third type of cognitive load is germane. So this is actually everything related to the business domain that we're working on. So imagine that software delivery team is working on some banking application, and probably they need to know a lot about this domain, how bank transfers work, and a lot of other aspects, right? So everything that's actually related to the added value that we're trying to provide to our customers. So you can generally look at them like this. Germane is a business focus. And so from here, you might realize that what we would like to happen is to minimize the intrinsic cognitive load. And this is something we do actually on a regular basis with either classical training or mentoring or pair programming as well, code reviews, all these different ways in which we're trying to improve the skills of people and reduce their intrinsic cognitive load, because we want to minimize that. We also want to minimize the extraneous cognitive load. And this is where effectively the other supporting topologies that I'm going to talk about come in. So we reduce this obviously through automation sometimes, but also through the tooling sometimes, but also through the topologies that I'm going to talk about. Because if we can minimize those first two, then we're going to leave more of that cognitive capacity for the germane aspect. So the teams can focus more on the business and the problems they're trying to solve, rather than the kind of the peripheral tasks and aspects of their work. So Daniel North talked about this idea of thinking about cognitive load as, when applied to software, you need to be responsible for software that fits in your head. You can kind of grasp the software that you're responsible for at kind of individual level. And so when we're talking about cognitive load at the team level, then we're talking about software that fits our heads as a team, right? When we let teams go over their cognitive capacity, either because sometimes teams are victims of their own success because they've done well and they've been able to deliver value on a regular basis, and then we ask them to do more and we ask them to do more, and then they go beyond their cognitive capacity, their cognitive load, and what starts to happen is they start to negatively impact these key metrics from the Accelerate book. So in the Accelerate book that I mentioned earlier, they talk about the practices, but also key metrics that correlate to high-performing team, elite performing teams. And so they talk about lead time, how long it takes to get from an idea or request until it's available to customers, how often we deploy, how quickly can we recover, restore degraded or unavailable service back to its healthy state, the mean time to restore, and how often do we have failures in our changes in our deployments. So if the cognitive load is too high for a team, typically all of this might be affected. So the time it's going to take us to understand how to implement a feature or a request safely and deliver that is going to increase. So we're going to do less frequent deployments. If we have an incident in this kind of bigger software that we're responsible for, but we don't totally understand all of it, or perhaps it has so much technical depth that it's very hard to kind of evolve and restore when there are problems. The mean time to restore is going to go up. It's going to take us longer to diagnose problems and to fix them. And the same for change fail percentage. We're probably going to have more failures because we don't have a good understanding perhaps of the impact of one change on other parts of the software responsible for, because it's too much for a cognitive load. And so we have the stream-aligned teams and the product teams that are trying to provide this regular flow of value of delivery to our customers, whether they're external or internal customers. And the other topologies, the first one I'm going to talk about is platform and platform teams. So the goal of this topology is for the platform to provide abstractions around the lower level services that most of the stream-aligned teams are going to need, at least in modern software delivery. So we know that we need our deployment pipelines. We need to monitor our services. We need to have automated infrastructure provisioning if we want fast flow of delivery. These are all things that we need and fast response to problems. And so what the platform is going to do is provide those services in a kind of self-service approach, so that your stream-aligned teams, your product teams don't have to know all the internals around how do I monitor, which tools, and how do I set this up, for example, and the same for other aspects. So whatever we can provide as services that accelerate the stream teams, because now they can self-serve, they can consume those, and they don't have to own them. It's making the distinction between stream teams as consumers of those aspects, monitoring infrastructure, CI/CD, and many other things, telemetry, etc. They are consumers. They're not the owners. They shouldn't have to worry about how do I install the tools, how do I, connect, and how do I configure everything. Which typically, in the past, in my experience at least, we would just, expect teams to do that by themselves because they are technical teams, right? So if they can code and deploy applications, why can't they, do all the other technical stuff in their stack? And again, we go back to the cognitive load. Yes, they can, but then the amount that's left to focus on germane aspects is strongly reduced. So the platform team is one of the supporting topologies in this sense, providing self-service capabilities that several, perhaps not all of them, but typically many streamlined teams are going to need. I like to call this feeding as a service to my kids when they were a bit smaller, not anymore. So it's important to define clearly what we mean by platform, because it's kind of overloaded term. And it's very different, the digital platform as defined here, from kind of the traditional platform that look more like a black box, right? So a digital platform, as in this definition from Evan Butcher that we agree with, is a foundation of self-service APIs, tool services, so the way that they are consumed, but also the knowledge and support around them, arranged as a compelling internal product. So there are different aspects here that we should think about. Yes, the self-service capabilities, but also if we need knowledge and support, that means obviously we need teams around them, teams that own those platform services, and support. We need to think about how is interaction with our customers, with our streamer teams that are using the platform. And finally, the last 3 words are very important: the compelling internal product. That means we're not mandating the platform to other teams. We're not saying everyone must use this. We're thinking about the platform as a product. And so in that sense, it should be optional. The streamline teams should adopt the platform services if they see the value. And so this changes a lot of the thinking in the platform teams. So it's not about going off and okay, we know we have perhaps the technical skills to build all these great services, but that's not the point. What we need to do is actually focus on the needs of our customers, our product teams as customers, and actually understand what they need, and then develop the services in a much more iterative way, in a much more agile way, which is not very familiar to many people who have a more of background in things like infrastructure, networking, etc. And so we need to help them change their way of thinking and clarify how the platform works, and then why it needs to be a product and not something that we mandate. And effectively, an efficient platform like this is going to make things easier for the product team. It's going to kind of pave the way. It's going to say, look, if you as a product team have a valid reason to do, let's say, your deployment pipelines in a different tool set, you still have the autonomy to decide that. But actually, what the platform provides, if it's done well, then is a much easier, reliable way to do the same thing. So at some point, that product team might realize, well, if we just use the platform, that's going to save us effort and time that we can use for more business-focused aspects. A good platform is, like I said, treated as a product. So in particular, it needs to be reliable and usable and fit for purpose, right? We're not building all sorts of services just because we can or because we know. We're actually focused on what's going to help directly the product team. So it needs a strong product development approach, and definitely product owners or another role that can help drive the platform in the right direction. The second supporting topology I'm going to talk about are enabling teams. So these enabling teams kind of orbit, if you like, around the streamline team. So they're usually a team of experts around some domain. So it could be an enabling team for even for product management and product development, or an enabling team for continuous delivery or for test automation, whatever domains your product teams need help with. Because this team of experts, usually a kind of a small team, is going to help your product teams gain the knowledge. It's a little bit like training wheels in this photo, helping them get started. If they don't know how to do product management, well, they don't know, for example, what are user personas, to understand the different types of customer segments and that we have for a product, then perhaps we need an enabling team for product development that's going to help them learn these skills. And the same for all those other competencies that we looked at. Whatever we identify as a gap that is, a high priority, then we probably should have enabling teams helping them. And kind of a side effect of this, but an important side effect, is then, first of all, you start having less handovers. You don't depend on these experts to do the work. You depend them out of flow. You depend on them to help with your capability gaps and help you to learn faster and reduce the learning curve as a product team. And the other thing, if you think about it in terms of the recruitment aspect and the difficulty that many organizations have recruiting for certain skills and certain areas, this means hopefully with a much smaller pool of experts, we might be able to help many more teams. So we're not expecting to hire perhaps a UX expert for each product team, but we might have a few UX experts and usability experts in an enabling team that are going to go and kind of go around the product teams and help them evolve and gain the understanding they need around these aspects. So that's kind of a nice side effect, important side effect. And the last supporting topology are complicated subsystem teams. Interestingly, this is in a way something we don't recommend, but we acknowledge that sometimes there's essentially no other way around. So what does this mean? We're not talking about any kind of subsystem that we think it's a bit complicated that we're going to create a team, because that would be very similar to component teams, right? A team that owns this piece, but then can quickly become bottleneck. We're talking about parts of a system that are not typically user directly providing value to the end users of that system, and also that require a very deep expertise, so kind of PhD level understanding. So some examples are, I worked with systems that used face recognition. We actually had someone with a PhD who actually understood all the variables into this algorithm of face recognition. And most of them are still quite bad at it, to be honest, and it still needs all this expertise. And other examples: video codec processing, real-time finance trading. This all require very in-depth level of knowledge. And because teams are limited in size, typically, right? So usually the 2 pizza team, if you like, 7 ± 2 people. That means if we have a product or a service that requires face recognition, but that's not the end value, then we actually need a team around that, because it takes a full team, or it takes too much cognitive load to ask a product team to take care of that. So there might be some specific situations where you might need this, but most of organizations should try to avoid complicated subsystem teams because of the problem of them becoming a bottleneck. If that subsystem is changing very quickly, if there are a lot of dependencies from other teams on that subsystem, this can, again, start to slow down the flow. in my experience, at least in that face recognition, the speed of the cadence of change was not very high, and therefore it was possible just with a couple of people to keep it evolving nicely, but there might be different situations. And so just to give an analogy, if I ask my 3-year-old son to tie his shoelaces, that's too much cognitive load for him right now. So we need to find a different way to do that. It's unrealistic to ask him to be able to understand how to do that. So finally, the last part of this talk is about the fact that it's not just about the topologies, that is part of the what we're talking about to support the product teams and have this kind of family of teams that we talk about in team topologies, but also the interactions between them, right? If the interactions are not clear, are not working as we expected, then we're still going to have problems, even if we have those topologies. So we talk about 3 core interaction modes: collaboration, acts as a service, and facilitating. In our experience, and we haven't had anyone tell us that they need another type of interaction. What tends to happen is that we, especially this kind of something that DevOps in a way influenced, is the idea that everyone should collaborate with everyone. And actually we benefit a lot from having much clearer idea of what collaboration is, how does it manifest, and not the same for the other interaction modes. So very quickly, since I've been talking for a long time already, collaboration is when 2 teams are working together with a specific goal, either to find a solution to a problem or to, for example, clarify how some API should look like. Whatever it might be, there's a clear purpose for the collaboration. And there's also an expected duration. Is this going to happen for 2 months, 1 day per week, or is this going to happen for 2 weeks that we're working together all the time? How is this going to take place? And obviously we'll get it wrong many times because we're in general pretty bad at estimating these things, but we have an idea of what is the expected duration, and very importantly, what is the objective of this collaboration, because the collaboration has costs as well. If we're saying these 2 teams collaborate to find this solution to this problem, then each of those teams is going to probably reduce their throughput over their own backlog, how much they can deliver during that collaboration period, right? And so we take this cost knowing that there's a benefit of finding that solution, that solving that problem that we have that requires the 2 teams to work together. Acts as a service is typically one team provides a service that provides a service that 1 or more teams consume. So this is effectively one of the core interaction modes for platform teams, right? So when we have a stable service that is fit for purpose and reliable, we're typically in this acts as a service interaction where we expect the service to be easy to understand, easy to use, and reliable, so that the other teams can just consume it. They don't actually need to ask us for collaboration. They might obviously have requests for help or some support, but it's not ongoing type of interaction. So you can think about also external providers like AWS, all their services are provided as acts as a service, right? In general, unless you're Netflix or some big organization that pays a lot of money to AWS, you're not going to get in touch with directly with the AWS engineer working on this service, right? So those services that AWS provides need to be very clear, very easy to understand, have examples, have good documentation, and so on. So we should be thinking the same way for our internal platform. And sometimes you have teams providing services to others that are not platforms as well. That's possible. And finally, facilitating is when one team helps another. So this is the primary interaction mode for enabling teams. Remember that the team of experts is going to help bridge the knowledge gap of the product team. So they will be helping those teams, providing knowledge, through different ways. They can have kind of classic trainings, workshops, or they might be pairing with people from that team on some examples, this kind of mentoring and coaching. It can take different forms, but it's one team helping another one. Interestingly, and what we can do when we have an understanding of topologies interaction modes, we can have a snapshot, we can have an idea of right now in my organization or part of my organization, which types of teams do we have and how are they interacting? This is kind of organizational landscape view, if you like, of where we are now. So to make it very clear, this is not a model. It's not something like Spotify model 2.0 or something like that. It's a snapshot. It's saying right now, this is what's happening or what we expect that is happening. And what we can get from this kind of view is that we understand, in this example, we understand, look, there's an enabling team helping a streamline team, perhaps around, I don't know, test automation for mobile apps or what have you. There's a gap that they have. They also use a complicated subsystem and they need some new features perhaps, or they need to solve some problems they're having with this complicated subsystem. And so they're collaborating. That's what this means here. With a specific goal, with a specific expected duration. And then this kind of little X's means X as a service, right? So they are, in particular, the streamline teams are consuming platform services without actually needing to interact on an ongoing basis, just consuming the services they need. And so this is helpful because this gives us a view of, what are our gaps? What are the gaps we're trying to address today? How are the interactions happening? Which teams are interacting with others? And, knowing what are the perhaps changes that are coming in new technology that we need to adopt, or changes in the market that requires us to acquire skills, different skills from what the teams have today. This helps us think about how we're going to do that in a much more evolutionary way. We're not saying this is not, again, it's not a model, it's not a static approach. I would say this is how we set up our teams. This is a snapshot, and we can then reason about what are the next states, if you like, in our evolution. What do we think we're going to need next? So we can, if we identify we need an enabling team that we don't have around UX, for example, then we can start working on creating that team and getting that team to help with the streamline teams. We have found that obviously used with care, there's 4 fundamental team topologies, and the 3 core interaction modes are what we need are sufficient to build and run modern software systems, because they allow organizations to evolve in a much more continuous way, in a much more like a living organism, rather than those big reorgs where we go from one model to the next model and we expect the next model to be the right one. And so today we looked at this, a little bit about how these topologies might evolve as well, but obviously there's a lot more in the book that we talk about, in particular, some of the key aspects that we talk about in the book and in our trainings are how do we size software according to the team cognitive load, Conway's law, and how do we avoid kind of big mismatches with Conway's law, which is very quickly is that idea that there's this kind of force that mirrors the team structures and team communications into what kind of system design and system architecture we end up with. So there's this mirroring effect. We also need to address, we talked about to be able to evolve the organization, but we need to sense when we need to evolve, right? So we need to understand, have an idea of what triggers and when should we be looking at, how can we look at ways to evolve, when is the right time to evolve the organization. And And finally, something we call Thinnest Viable Platform, which is directly related. Obviously, it's derived from MVP, from minimum viable product. So this applying the idea of platform thinking as a product and trying to keep it minimal, provide the most value with the least amount of actual tools and builds and services in the platform. So we focus on what's actual differentiators for our internal organization. So I'm almost at the end. Thank you for your patience. There's some resources that I have in the slides. So some of the talks I mentioned around product orientation, also organizations that have this platform approach in the way that we've talked about today. So some useful resources there. Besides the book that is available on Amazon and all major retailers, we're actually working on a free workbook that is specific, obviously giving the current situation where most people are working from home. And, we expect there's going to be even after we're, hopefully soon past this pandemic, where we expect to see a shift in how many teams are working remotely. And so how is that going to impact the interactions between them? So we're taking some of the ideas in team topologies, applying that to remote work. And that's going to be essentially a free PDF published by IT Revolution. We have different trainings. So now everything is remote friendly, and each of these are half-day trainings. So have a look there if you're interested. We also do remote friendly assessments, and because Gopal mentioned there are different roles in this meetup. So for people who are more like a project management role or even product management, there's a online self-paced course around team topologies for project managers, and there's the 20% discount code there if you want to use that. I'll make the slides available to everyone, and I can send to Gopal if you want to share as well. I'll comment in the meetup with a link. On the website, on teamtopologies.com, we have a number of resources. You have key concepts and some of the talks we've given. There was a talk at DevOps Enterprise Summit recently where we go through different industry examples, companies that adopted the ideas in team topologies. And there are also a number of repositories in GitHub, which are effectively not code. They are some templates for things like team APIs, for platform, how do you expose platform information to other teams, etc. So, have a look there if you want to use any of these small tools and templates. And with that, I'm finished the talk. Thank you again for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Manuel, thank you so much. By the way, I got kicked out, so you'll have to make me host again, Manuel. Thank you.
Sure.
For everybody, please post your questions, or you can unmute yourself. This is a small group, and you can unmute yourself and ask the question. I do have one question to kick this off, Manuel. You mentioned about the BMW 100% Agile and all that. Can you talk a little bit in terms of your experience implementing this team topologies, moving teams into more Agile, value city, I think instead of productivity, valuity focus? If you can share some example you have, you're most successful with in this, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good question that we get quite frequently. So what's interesting, what we found out after the book was published, especially as we saw different kind of roles of people coming to our training sessions, and there are different kind of entry points to team topology. So in some cases, we see kind of agile coaches that are focused more on how do I get the team to be more autonomous and remove the the handovers and dependencies they have on other teams and things like this. We sometimes see more kind of architect roles who are aware of Conway's law, and we're trying to work out, how do we consider both the technical and the system design and the team structures when we're trying to develop new solutions and adopt new technology, etc. If you want kind of a more kind of broader adoption of team topologies, we have some examples which I'm maybe able to show very quickly since I'm still sharing. Industry examples that we are adding to teamtopologies.com. So until now, the organizations have been able to actually take team topologies as a whole, if you like, adopt most of the ideas are small organizations, which kind of makes sense. So we are publishing those examples on teamtopologies.com. So companies like Gensigdig, I never pronounce it right, insurance in Norway, and other kind of not very large organizations have adopted the topologies. So they started looking at their existing teams and how they kind of align or not with the topologies. And what that allowed them to do is then say, okay, if this is the purpose of this team, if this is a product team or if this is a platform team or enabling team, how do we get them closer to the expected behaviors and patterns that we talk about in team topologies? And so that from there, they kind of define their evolution. But again, it depends. We start to see large organizations are trying to adopt some of the ideas. And obviously there are aspects that you come across that are going to take longer to address. So we see organizations that have separation between kind of the product development part of the organization and the engineering part of the organization. And so it becomes harder for those product teams, engineering teams to have the autonomy around experimenting and delivering based on outcomes and not on feature requests, if you like. So it's really a spectrum. Just trying to find the slides of that talk that we gave a few weeks ago at DevOps Enterprise Summit, where actually we go through these examples. It's this one here, where we actually go through different examples of organizations that have applied the topologies, and some of the results. So it depends. It depends a bit on the size of organization, to which extent you can, or how quickly you can adopt this idea. So I would expect for most organizations that are larger, this is going to be kind of an evolution. But you can start kind of small, if you like, by trying to align your existing teams with what type of topology we would expect them to move towards, and how do we then clarify the expected behaviors? How do we clarify the interface with other teams?
This is awesome, and that deck definitely. It sounds like a lot of people are asking the questions. Many companies these days are extremely focused on results, as you know. So this is awesome. Thank you, Manuel.
I can include the link to this slide deck perhaps in the comments of the meetup as well.
Yeah, please do. Thank you. Anyone has any other questions for Manuel?
Yeah, Manuel, I just want to say thank you for this informative presentation, and I want to share my gratitude for the Team Topologies book. It's been a huge help for our organization to have a common language when we're talking about different types of teams and the interactions, and really has helped us transform to have more efficient flow. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate hearing that. And it's actually a very frequent comment we get, that the book just put together and provide a lexicon, a language for some of the problems that we see often, things like cognitive load and the different topologies and interactions. So I'm very happy to hear that. And by the way, if you want to be industry example in teamtopologies.com, then just get in touch with me. So we're always open to publish more examples.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, how big is your company, and what sort of results did you get, since you mentioned the results here?
So we, about 350 people, and we're primarily applying this to our engineering side, but also with, we have some anti-patterns of a separate DevOps team that we're trying to address. And we're also in the middle of a transformation to SAFe. So we find that they align very closely. And it's too early to share actual results, but I think it's more clear, the understanding of the different team types. So our conversations about organizational changes are more structured now.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. What industry are you in?
Financial services.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, if at some point you feel like you're at a point where you'd like to share that, then yeah, it would be great.
Okay.
Hi, this is Kamal. I joined really late on the meetup. Sorry about that, but I have a question that's been on my mind for the last few weeks. So with COVID, having to work from home and all that, what I'm generally noticing is that sense of being a team, which was very strong when you saw each other every day. You talked about work, non-work, there was a special bonding that was there earlier. Now that spirit is kind of lacking. How do you, in this remote environment, keep up that emotional bonding that a team needs to continue to perform?
I think that's definitely something that has happened to many teams. And if actually when the lockdown started in many places, I actually saw a lot of resources on LinkedIn and other social media around how to cater for the team in this kind of remote environment, how you should not try to just kind of take all your current practices in the physical office to the virtual office. So I'm not really an expert on that. I think there are a lot of resources, but in general, you need to have a concerted effort to make that happen inside the team, right? You need to think about how we're going to keep this, the trust and the especially fluid communication inside the team. So you definitely might, if the team doesn't have one yet, they probably should look at having a team working agreement where you agree, how do we prefer to interact? Are we going to have, some teams have webcam always on for everyone, so you can see see the other people in the team. Others prefer chat tools and having their own channels. But whatever it is, make it clear what goes into email versus what needs to be kind of a synchronous communication, face-to-face. But definitely many teams this is something new for them. What we have focused more, so actually there's another talk we've given a few times. It's not just inside the team, as you were saying, that's an important problem to address, but also between different teams as well. So there's this other talk we've given a few times about remote first interactions for teams, where we talk about different aspects. I can include this link as well. But how do we, if we know there's always dependencies between teams. It's not that we want to minimize them, but it's not like we can have full independent teams. So how do we have these interaction modes clarified and promoted in a good way in a virtual environment? So thinking about how we set up our virtual spaces, how do we clarify communication channels? is very important also between different teams in the same organization, because now you don't even have the, the coffee machine that you stumble upon someone from another team and you talk about what you're doing, etc. All those interactions that are more casual are gone. So we need to be much more intentional about both those core interaction patterns to have specific goals, but also just informal networking. And perhaps you might want to promote that people from different teams actually schedule calls between them just to talk and just to hear how's life going for you, what have you been doing, and that be part of the actual day work of that person, of the people in your team. So again, in this talk, we talk a bit more about this, how we set up, chat tools and how do we manage dependencies between teams in this remote work from home environment.
Thank you.
Hi,
Sorry.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
For Manuel. So this is very visual, the team interactions and the team topologies, right? And I know that it's already available, the modeling shapes that you can buy and play with it. But I'm thinking if there will be like an app or something that you can design that you can then share visually to other peers instead of just making yourself the drawings,
Yes, so we've actually been working a bit on that. So there are different things available. One of them is this modeling shapes that you mentioned. So it's a PDF that you can download, and if you want to print and cut them yourself. There's also, we collaborated with Agile Stationery that they create this kind of shapes for you, so you can buy that from them. Obviously, because now people are not in the same physical location, if you want to have a group kind of discussing the topologies and interactions in the organization, that's going to be a bit harder. We're starting to work on public templates in different tools. So in Miro boards, in Google Slides kind of templates. In fact, we have created the repository so people can also contribute, so we can kind of group together what the different modeling shapes in different tools. So I mentioned there we have a number of templates and techniques here. Let me see. Team shape templates is that one, because we had actually more people asking us about how can we use the shape. So there's one that was contributed for draw.io and diagrams.net. The Miro board one, which seems to be quite popular, is what we use in our training sessions, our remote training. It takes a bit longer because it has to be approved by Miro itself. So we're working on that. So those are kind of the options. So in this repository, you'll find when there's new ways of new templates available in other tools.
So the template you're talking about.
The link?
Yep, I'll share the link as well. Sure.
So the Miro template would be available in Miroverse. That's what you're
yes. So it seems to take some time. We were playing a little bit because obviously we cannot replicate the exact shapes of the book in those different tools. So we try to have the native shapes in the tool, so that's more flexible, and we try to find a way that they look similar enough.
Miro, yeah. I know that this is lunchtime for many people in the West Coast, so there are people who dropped off. Ron made a comment in the chat window before he dropped off. He was thankful, and he wanted to get more nuance around platform teams. That's what he mentioned. I don't know the background about that.
Okay. just on the modeling shape, so you can see we have this case study from USwitch company in the UK, and then these are from Miro boards that we created the diagram. So it's looks kind of similar. It's not like an X, is a kind of more of a pyramid shape, and then it's actually, this is quite an interesting case study. I think all are interesting, but this has a very interesting evolution, and they have different platforms and SRE enabling team, etc. So these are from those Miro shapes. In terms of platform nuance, it is something that I obviously today just touched briefly. We do have one training session that's focused on modern platforms because it's actually quite a lot of very different from those traditional platforms. So the idea of the platform as a product, and when should we be collaborating with the product teams versus providing X as a service. It's actually there's a lot of material, a lot of different thinking from what would be the traditional platform approach. So I guess the answer is, yeah, that training is where we deep dive into that.
Yeah.
But this example from USwitch has a lot of those ideas as well in their own words, obviously. So it's interesting.
Awesome. Anybody else has any questions? So Manuel, I want to thank you again for your time. Appreciate you taking the evening and spending time with us.
Thank you.
This was really enlightening. Thanks so much. We definitely would like for you to come again and talk to us. And thanks for the discount and all the links. And please send me the information and I will distribute it out. We have a YouTube channel where we will be posting the recording, as well as we will be posting the PowerPoint, the PDF file, as well as the links. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening and wonderful afternoon. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.